What's up again, everybody? How y'all doing today? Well, it's a Friday in late October. Winter is about here. The fall is in full gear. The leaves are falling. My fingertips are cold. And this is around the time of year where I do a lot of thinking. And in the past years, I've made videos in the winter where I talk about seasons of the soul, seasons of the mind, whatever you want to call it, where we actually have, well, I can't speak for everyone, but many of us have a different outlook on life in the winter. It can actually be more depressing. Depends on where you live. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so we get a lot of rain and it tends to be overcast. But that aside, what I wanted to talk about today was relating to our, I guess, what exactly is it that causes us to feel anxiety or depression? And usually it's our feeling that we either should be doing more, we should have done something, we shouldn't have done something, or our fear of the unknown. But all of this is based around being a human, which in itself seems to be a relatively pleasant experience for most people. And before you say, no, that's bullshit, no, it's a miserable experience, and existence is horrible and miserable, I know a lot of people feel that way. But often, our misery can be traced back to our own lack of understanding, our ignorance about how to live our lives, right? And this can be shown plainly in people who abuse others and or steal from others and go to jail for it, or people who push others away and they end up with no friends, people who are constantly, whatever your attitude may be towards life, we know that there's this certain default mode that humans have, and we tend to get along. Most people tend to be able to get along and have pleasant experiences with one another. So when you're young, you're fed a mixed bag of bullshit. When you're growing up, you're told to be unique. You're told to be an individual, that you should be, I should say, many people are told to be an individual. Others are told to fall in line like a cookie cutter kid. But for the most part, I think today, at least in the West, we've pushed people to be different, be independent, be an individual and discover some amazing, invention or whatever it might be. The point being that we know that there's value placed on a unique perspective. If you think like the group, then you're only going to produce what the group produces. Now, I consider myself a pretty unique individual, and I guess I always have been. I mean, I dress the way I want, I do the things I want, but at the same time, I fall in line with what I consider to be eccentric. To other people it may be absurd, and I question myself as to, well, why do I even care? Why don't I just wear a polo shirt and jeans every single day? And why do I care how other people perceive me? Well, I've gotten over that whole trying to understand the ego, trying to understand why we do the things we do, and just came to the conclusion that peacocking or standing out or being an individual, it's a good feeling for a lot of people because it allows others to know where you're coming from, that you're unique. Whereas some people feel much safer to just dress like the rest of the people, to wear whatever's popular. And that's fine too, whatever it may be. But the real point I want to make here before I get too far off track is that we're told basically to be unique, but to follow the rules. To be unique, but to fall in line. To be ourselves, but to make sure that we fit in. And regardless of whether an individual parent or teacher or wherever we learn these things, most of us come to the same conclusions, that you want to stand out just enough to be, to be unique. But at the same time, you got to realize the silliness in not being, it's hard to define. It's like, the birds of paradise. Those fucking things are amazing. I mean, the dances they do for one another, and the vast variety of different methods which they have. Some flash their feathers, others do dances, some clear away a nice little area or some birds build a house, or even do art and build these little creations for females to come and check out. And it's interesting to observe in nature how animals interact with each other on a male to male, a female to female, and then the male to female connection, the way that we attract our mates. And in today's world, we have gotten so confused about what that even means. And so being different is no longer safe for a lot of people. But here's the thing. I don't really want to get into that discussion right now, I guess, about the men and women thing. This morning I was reading an article and came across the hashtag men are trash. And I did a little digging into that. It goes back a few years, but there was this argument that men shouldn't defend their position against women who feel victimized, who are saying all men are trash. And it was this idea that the women were saying, even if you're a good guy, it doesn't matter. We have the right, since we've been victimized, to say these things. And it opened up this, I don't know, I've been doing some thinking this morning about our dialogue with one another and the way that we deal with speech, And speech at one time was something that made us unique, I guess. I don't really want to go down that road right now. I don't really want to talk about that aspect of it. I guess mostly to stick to the main point here. What are we supposed to do when, if we stand out too much, we're singled out? And if we don't stand out enough, we're ignored? And a lot of younger kids, especially teenagers, I really do remember those days well. In fact, they say that your teenage years are some of the most well-remembered years, which is interesting. You forget your younger years, and then from the time you're 12 till about 20, you tend to remember those years rather well compared to your 20s. You'll forget your 20s, or a lot of it, especially because you're working, you're doing routine things, you're living your life. But when you're young, you're having these new experiences. You're having these amazing epiphanies and discoveries. I don't know at what point I decided I'm going to be different, but I also don't know at what point later I realized being different is just being the same. You can line 10 clowns up next to each other. They're all still clowns, right? So in other words, I don't use my own eccentric nature as thinking that, I'm somehow better. It's just how I choose. Because my mind works in strange ways, I advertise that with the feathers that I display, if that makes sense. When you look at a guy with, long braided hair and funky clothes and necklaces on you, in the past, people would be like, you smoke pot, don't you? It's like one of those things where, hey, if anyone knows where to get the weed, you're that guy, right? And I hated being labeled that way. But at the same time, there's a part of me that says, well, it's true. I can't deny who I am, right? I grew up in stoner culture, went to Dead shows, and still love that, scene. So that brings up an interesting point of how we don't like being judged, but often we're judged correctly. So what it comes down to is, are we being judged as being something we don't like being? And if that's true, then change who you are. If people make fun of you because you're too boring and that offends you, then try to be more excitable, more eccentric, more interesting. I don't know. It's not that easy, of course, but you'll make efforts in your life to maybe change some things because maybe people don't want to spend time with you. If you're too intense and you cause too many problems, you're going to have the same problem with people. They're not going to want to spend time with you because they might get in trouble or get hurt riding in your car because you're drinking and driving. And my point there is that I've left a lot of friends behind in the past because we were just on not different levels. I hate using that term because levels presume that there's something higher or lower. And I guess that would be the proper term because there are higher levels of being. The guy who's going to jail every week and not paying, not helping with the kids and leaves and becomes a junkie and goes out and enjoys his own life, which I've had friends who have done that, who abandon their role and their responsibilities. And then there's another person who tries really hard and he sacrifices a lot of things he wants to do in order to be a better person. Then yes, there are levels. So I guess leaving a lot of people behind because they refuse to mature, but not mature by society's standards, but my mind. Because as an individual, I judge what I think is mature in people. A person could be completely off their rocker sometimes and act all crazy and wild. That to me shows sanity. I know that may not make sense to a lot of people, but I'm nervous around people who act too straight edge, people who are too straightforward and normal, who really are desperately want to be normal. They don't want to laugh too hard or they don't want to cry. It's just this kind of neutral, plain kind of attitude. And it's just, I don't have any interest hanging around people like that. I like eccentric people. And so I found my comfort in it. But there was a weird point when I must have changed, and I think it was when I was younger and I became a skater kid. I was really into heavy metal. I still love heavy metal. And then I became a hesher, I guess you would call it, the metal kids. Then I was a hesher/skater, and kind of a little troublemaker, but I was a pretty good kid. And over the years, it was like, I always wanted to have the different boards or some random one-off shirt or pants that nobody else had, that had no brand name or just weird looking, things like that. And so I just owned it. It just became who I was, and I became comfortable with it. So I guess this is really just a general discussion about being comfortable with yourself, because you're the only one who has to be. And I know that a lot of people really want to impress others, and we want other people to like us. But damn it, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like you. There's always going to be somebody who's going to look at you funny. And I would say that there's always going to be somebody who judges you. But the fact is, and we all know this is true, everyone is judging you. And everyone will judge you for your entire life. Every single person you meet will have an instant judgment. Whether or not they separate themselves from that instantaneous judgment and analyze their judgment remains to be seen. But it's really hard to break people away from their initial image, and this is why they say first impressions are everything, and it's really hard to break that. So you want to be yourself, and you don't know how, and that's a common story. And what I'd like to say to that is, if there's anything I can offer on that angle, it's that sometimes being yourself is something you have to create. Actually, if you want to be unique, then you absolutely have to create it. It's like an art piece. And this goes back to something I read a couple years ago, where it said, everyone is an artist. And the idea that some people are born artists, look, some people can paint amazing pictures at a young age. Some people can compose amazing piano pieces at a young age. There are people who are these savants. But the point being that we're looking at art the wrong way. If you can't paint and you can't make music, you can still learn those things, but you can always work on your life. And your life should be your first art template. That means every mistake you make, you have to learn from it. Every time you're judged, you have to learn from it. Every time you're put down by the system and screwed over, you gotta put up with it, figure it out, and learn how to beat it. Because playing the victim is the worst role you can play in this world. It's only going to cause you more problems. So if you're the kind of person who wants to blame others for your problems, if you're an adult who still talks about how your parents raised you, you got to get over that. If you got in trouble years ago and you're still angry at the whole system, you got to get over that. I mean, I've been busted twice for cannabis, and that was something I considered benign, non-harmful to anyone. But I don't, build up a huge resentment. Yeah, I hate the system. But as far as beating myself up, I guess, over what I've done in the past, or the mistakes I've made, or the addictions I've had, I refuse to. I acknowledge it, learn from it, and move on. And that's part of building your palate. I should say, that's how you use your palette to paint your picture. Because the one thing is this: you can build amazing things in your life. You can create art pieces that can be burned and destroyed. You can build towers that can come down in earthquakes. You can write amazing books that nobody reads. But the template for building yourself, nobody can take that away from you. And if somebody had told me this when I was a teenager, and I had had this understanding, I don't know where I would have gone with it. But when I was in my early 20s, that's when I kind of got into self-improvement, if you will, trying to understand how to make myself happier. Not to be that guy that says, oh, I know how to meditate better than you, or this one-upmanship people have, or not trying to impress people. I mean, you'll notice I never talk about my own spirituality. I don't talk about my beliefs very often. It's just because nobody, why should other people care what I believe? I've found my comfort, my God, my reality, my universal truth, and I'm still learning and working on that and painting the picture as I go. So if you're 15, if you're 20, if you're 25, if you're 30, and you're looking back on your life and saying, I should have done this, could have done this, or I shouldn't have done this, or I would have done this. You shoulda, coulda, woulda. It's just a bunch of bullshit. Think of all these old terms that we have. They all have a basis and roots within these feelings that we all have of our own insignificance, of our own failures, of our own lack of comprehension of what life is. And because of that, we're all in it together. And because of that, we all learn together. And if we're all learning together, then why the hell are we fighting so much? When I see people pointing the finger at one another merely for how somebody is dressed, it makes me wonder, we talk about defeating racism, misogyny, or sexism. We talk about conquering our judgment of others or how we view other people. But there are people of the same race, of the same religion, of the same dress, who argue about how to wear a tie or what color of a tie to wear. These are the kind of things that make us imbeciles as humans. The idea that we're so wrapped up in trivialities that we fail to address the fact that uniqueness is what makes life worth living. And on that note, if you like what everybody else likes, well, supply and demand says that you're going to pay more. Well, not always, but sometimes it can go the opposite direction. If you like obscure things, then they might be rarer, therefore harder to obtain, especially if you collect something. But I'm not just talking about buying things. If you like weird foods, if you like weird clothes, if you like to dress, from Goodwill or whatever it might be, you're going to find something for yourself, and you're not going to have to compete. And the reason I say that is not as much, is because this world is based on competition. And often we don't even really want what we're getting. We want it because we see somebody else wanting it. And this isn't just stuff. I'm not just talking about iPhones or watches, Apple Watches, or somebody who has some Louis Vuitton purse or fancy clothes. I mean, hell, if I was into name brand shit, I'd just buy knockoffs. I see no reason to waste your money if you're really just buying for a label. But that aside, each one of these, things that we can gain in our lives, it's just stuff. But what about unique ideas? What if everything were the same? What if we all ate the same food and everybody looked the same? Would we be happy then? No. So really understanding individuality is the root of life. That being different is what life's about. That everything is unique. I think that scares a lot of people. And I hate to say it, but the very thing that I find to be the most hopeful and amazing is the thing that scares a lot of people, and especially a lot of folks who are very tied up in a specific religion, one or another, that's where they have a lot of dogma or a belief system which doesn't allow them to think outside the box. If your belief system doesn't allow you to think about new ideas, then you're kind of trapped in that. And that cognitive dissonance of a person who wants to learn more about the universe but is told by their leaders and elders not to me, that's a travesty. That's what's held us back in so many ways. And what makes us fear being different and unique and trying new things. We like safety. So you got to get out of your safety zone. There are no safe spaces in this world. Memento mori. Remember you will die. I was reading an article this morning about a grave that they dug at a college. I believe it's overseas, maybe in Belgium or something. They dug a full-size grave out on the grounds of the university and put a rope around it, and you can schedule time to go lay in the grave. You're not allowed to bring books, cell phones, computers, or anything. You can only just be there. And there are kids who schedule regular times to lay in that grave. And say lay there for it can be 30 minutes to 3 hours. And one kid was saying he lays there for a couple hours and it puts life in perspective. He's seeing that rectangle of light above you and realizing you're going to die. And I hate to end on this note, but isn't that where the note will end? For all of us? They say that only 1/3 of people in the U.S. and which is even lower in some other places, talk about mortality and death with their own families even. People are so afraid to talk about their mortality that we get wrapped up in these arguments and details about what's after this life or whether there is anything after this life. And hopefully my message is coming across here, even though I seem to be off track. It's about how we view the world that determines how we view each other. And if you think that others are going to hell, that kind of puts a crimp in having a civil discussion with someone and thinking that you're on equal footing, if you will. What I can say to finalize this is, judge a man or a woman by their actions. Actions and attitudes are everything. But intention make up a lot of this. Just because you judge an action or an attitude, you might not realize the intention might be good. But another comment, or another quote, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So intention itself isn't enough. Basically, if someone has good intentions and they do something wrong, if we do something wrong and we're called out on it, we heal that and we figure out what we did wrong and we learn from that mistake. But ask yourself, who's telling you you're wrong? It's the question you always have to ask. If somebody's saying you're on the wrong path, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't be this way, it's a sure sign to watch out for that person. Because folks love to tell others how to live. And often it's because they feel so out of control in their own lives. In fact, those who control others almost always feel a lack of control in their own lives. The more you understand the basic psychology of control freaks and abusers, you can learn to avoid them in life. Because it's not a pretty rosy picture where everybody just gets along. I read a comment on one of my videos, and one of you left it the other day. It said, in the bottom of a thread of comments, and it was a quote, and it said, "Can't we all just get along?" And then down below it said, "Nope." That's simple. We really can't. We can try, but we're different, we're unique, we're different people. The best you can do is surround yourself with people who make you feel positive and feel happy in life. And that's how I want to come full circle. In the beginning of this video, I was talking about who we spend our time with, and it's important that we choose to surround ourselves with people who make us feel good. There is a default mode of being human. That's love and understanding. And when you've been with those you love and those who understand you, you know that feeling. And we should work towards that feeling. Because that feeling makes us comfortable. It makes us content in life. And if we don't have that, it can make us lash out. So find it where you can. Love really is the answer, but it's also the question. Why? But here we are. Thanks for listening. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you to my commenters, subscribers. And I'll talk to y'all soon. Be well. Remember, you will die.